Have you often sat in the back seat of a car and imagined a stickman jumping and sprinting across walls outside the rainy car window? Hi, I'm Dylan Davis, and this is my submission for Blocktober 2025. For those unaware, Blocktober is a yearly event where level designers of all skill sets spend the month of October creating a level on their own or in a team to improve their level design proficiency. The software and brief can be whatever you want it to be, but the only requirement is that the level is a prototype or in whitebox state to keep the project achievable in under a month. As for myself, I wanted to experiment with first-person controls to help de-rust. Additionally, I decided to create a platformer in Unreal Engine 5, as platformers have a simple goal without needing combat. They can also be linear, and they require minimal story and/or cutscenes to get the message across. Allow me to introduce you to Dasher, a first-person platformer inspired by Mirror's Edge, created on my own with music credits in the description. It is important to note that I use the first-person parkour starter kit on Fab by Dark Silver Games as a basis for the game. I chose this pack for two reasons. Firstly, it was fairly cheap, and secondly, the kit includes 3 key mechanics essential to my level: wall jumping, sliding, and climbing ladders. Remember, the focus of this project was to create a fun and fast-paced environment using pre-existing mechanics, and creating my own code for wall jumps would simply take too much time to develop when I only have a month to create this. Despite this, I still created various blueprints and widgets for the prototype, including matching sound effects to footsteps, dynamic rain, and win and loss conditions. Firstly, I set the time of day to be in the evening to force the player to rely less on point light and more so on colour-coded objects to progress. For instance, the ladders, platforms, wall jumps and more are all using a bright white material to act as a signifier to the player that these parts of the map can be interacted with, similar to the harsh reds in Mirror's Edge. Secondly, I used verticality to create a focal point in the city map. When you spawn, the player can immediately spot the tallest building and their end goal with a helicopter point of interest placed on top of the building. Additionally, I made some of the buildings on the linear path shorter than previous buildings. This is because it adds some risk to the game, as the player may have to sprint across a rooftop very close to the rising water. Furthermore, a platformer where you are always going up in a 3D city could get boring and too easy for players. There are some issues with creating a platformer based in a realistic city, which is that you cannot have floating platforms and need to justify why one platform is taller than the other. This is what inspired me to add construction vehicles to the level to help break up the buildings whilst crossing a large horizontal gap. Next, I added breadcrumbs and leading lines through the direction of the vehicles, wooden planks and paintings on interiors. This, combined with background buildings being too tall to reach, should help guide the player through the level and not get stuck. Additionally, as the level progresses, a water mesh is constantly rising, reducing the number of possible routes for the player to take. If the player touches the water, they lose and must restart from the beginning of the level. The player wins if they successfully reach the helicopter. I decided to not add checkpoints as the level is only 3 minutes long. Since the level acts as a tutorial, I placed text next to each obstacle and introduced each mechanic to the player, starting with the easiest, which is walking, and ending with wall jumping. The rain and puddle systems are custom-made materials and Niagara systems which only have a lifespan of a couple seconds, as too much rain frequently would destroy the game's frame rate. Another issue I encountered was the game would lag whenever the water started to rise, due to the mesh enveloping all the background buildings. Eventually, through a mixture of landscapes and adjusting the mesh sizes, I improved the frame rate. I also raised the speed of the water to prevent players from skipping the level entirely by sprinting to the construction site. Ultimately, if I worked on this prototype further, I would like more opportunities to use the timer mechanic, as currently it doesn't affect the gameplay. Additionally, I would like to look at introducing wall running or enemies, as this vastly increases the horizontal movement and distances between structures. Thanks for watching, and click the link in the description to play Dasher.
$100.